So as such, I believe we should definitely keep an eye on that region. 3045, I believe it is. I'm sorry, 3053. Yeah, so 3053. But then additionally, we have another event that occurs on the tail end of that event where we can actually see get my little pointer guy. This one's named after Mark Rober, the one of the gentlemen who worked on the Mars Curiosity. So here we are. And as you can see right here, this is a coil of plasma. It's on the surface of the sun. And as we move forward, you can see it's starting to move right there. It's starting to find its displacement. And right here we see that it's already reacting, and now it's expanding. You can see that little tiny gap right there. And then we see the ejection. So this flare looks like it would be quite possible that it occurred due to an eruption. So an eruption occurred, caused the displacement of the plasma, and then we had our C8 flare from the looks of it. However, let's take a look at a different angstrom. Looking at the sun in 131 angstroms, that was 171, we can see, going back to our 3053 region that had the full circumference flare that occurred. Let's go ahead and slow this one down. I like to look at them in a little bit of a slower motion so we can see the finer details rather than just glimpsing by. Alright, here we go. And so there's a nice little flare there coming up. And right here, you already see it starting to begin. Right here. And there it is. So as you see, it reaches all the way around. Now this reconfiguration that occurs post did not necessarily align things in a way that it's going to be calm, that's for sure. So I would be expecting more from this little area. Now that said, let's take a look over here and say hello to the event that's about to happen right there. And there's our C-8.3, I think it was. Let's see, let's pull it up. And it's a C-8.5. A class C-8.5, and it's at region 3047. Thank you, Sydney. And this region right here has what appears to be the eruption then flare, post-eruption. So with that said, let's take a look at angstroms. 131, by the way, which is what we're looking at now, the light blue sun, is great for seeing the solar flare activity, the hotter regions. This is perfect for seeing where those flares are and the hottest point of those flares. Regions, angstrom, 171 angstroms is good for viewing, and that's the gold sun. That's good for viewing where the coronal loops are. Good view of the surface, gives a nice little example of where all the plasma movement's happening through the coronal loops. There's that nice CME we saw the other day right there. And going to 304 angstroms, we're looking at singly ionized helium. And the benefit of this is we're seeing the hotter plasma movement, the actual plasma dispersal. A lot of the sorry, brain lapse. The filaments and prominences and also CMEs are more viewable on 304 angstroms typically than other ones. All right, slowing it down and going back, we're going to look first at 353 and see what's going on there. Now with this, what I like about the CME, or the flare rather, before we see the CME, this is a flare leading to CME. we see that there's a lot of internal and then the entire external. You see that right there. This is the some of the plasma that was displaced, and that became a CME. Came from this area. Hotter plasma took over its location, and we can see that as that event occurred, it's still not satiated, as it were. It's still having a lot of issues with its new configuration. You can see a lot of motion of plasma, and its alignment of the polarity is not really situated in a calmer stance, if that makes sense. uh, Quite bluntly, it is definitely a very high potential area still. Now, note to the right, this area right here is having some eruptions as well. The small CMEs that are occurring, these are like little puffs. But this right here, that right there, that's a big expelling of plasma post that flare. That's just a beautiful event. Now, post that, we look over at 3047, region 3047, and we can see that this event is actually plasma moving before the flare. In this case, it is the eruption that causes the flare. And here it is. You're starting to see the actual movement of the plasma already. It's moving externally. It's just going outward. And as that happens, it then flares. So the plasma movement and separation is what started that flare. This is quite a beautiful display of how these events aren't just a carbon copy of flare, CME, or just eruption. There's just a lot of different ways this can occur. And an eruption doesn't necessarily always mean the same thing either. We can have an eruption where a filament loses its connection, but it doesn't actually become a CME. It becomes a prominence. We had one of those earlier this week. Oh, absolutely. This right here would have been quite easily mistaken to be the other way around had we seen this face on. Now this event right here, the 3047 region with the C-8.5, does not appear to have any interaction towards Earth. So we have the flare, of course, which travels the speed of light. It has already done its bit, as it were. And we're seeing a proton flux increase, quite possibly due to that. And there's also... Yeah, but all the expelling plasma is going away from the Earth. We're looking at the plasma dispersal is ahead of orbit, and actually a pretty good trajectory if it was facing us would have included Earth. So it's just ahead of orbit. The salutation is Deep Quake 9. Yes, kindex. The proton flux is increasing, quite possibly due to the C-8.5. And in looking at angstrom 193, we can see that this region 347 has already been having some issues. You see some plasma movement from the Corona view. This is angstroms 193, and you can see that the area was already sort of volatile as it starts rotating over. And there you can see the plasma more clearly. There, I jumped ahead a little bit, and there's the expelling. So here's our future CME. You can see that coil of plasma right over top. And then zooming forward, we can see that coil from the side-on view. starts reaching outward, and as it starts to basically remove itself, it leads to a flare. And that is, I would say, most likely due to the amount of coronal loops that are actually over that filament that's erupting outward. And as that happens, it collides with those loops, and thus our flare. But looking at Angstrom 193, looking at the M class we had, M-2.61 from region 3053, we can see that this little area has a lot of heavy plasma as well. Right here, this nice little line, and this cooler, heavier plasma plays a lot into this event. As you can see, it's already starting to disrupt, and there's that flare. And you can see a little more clearly looking at the corona how much of the area has been impacted by this flare. Now, everything I've looked at for this M class, the plasma displacement, or the CME from this, does not appear to be heading towards Earth, but we are going to see some activity, some active time periods due to what's happening to the right of this, or to the west. And you can see over here there are frequent little puffs, little CMEs that have been occurring. So that's going to be something to keep an eye on. See right here, we're going to see it a little more clearly now. And that's something to keep an eye on, because this is going to give an increase to the K index, and it might cause some active conditions. I don't know if we'll hit a G1 from it, but that is not because of the M-class flare. These are completely independent events that we're seeing there coming from here. Now, independent as in the directional, but I do believe there is a correlation between these events occurring and the disruption that's caused over here. So related as per the surface, but as per active conditions for the Earth, these are independent. See, and you see it happening right there. And there it is. That is a beautiful flare. But we're still having frequent little puffs coming from, I call them puffs because they're not like extravagant or large CMEs, not very likely to cause geomagnetic conditions of that nature. Might give us a slight increase to the aurora, but nothing substantial. So this we will be noticing about the same time, give or take, that we would have received something from this M class. So this M class does not look like it's heading our way at all, but this happening over here is. I wanted to point that out because I know a lot of times we'll see a large event, but no one talks about the smaller things. And we're wondering how something had hit us when it was supposed to not, it was projected not to. And this explains exactly that. This explains how there's more activity going on that's often overlooked because it's not substantial. And we focus on the larger events, but it doesn't always mean that that's what's hitting us. And looking more focused on the corona itself, pulling up Angstrom 335. This is the takes a little bit longer to load this this Angstrom filter, so it'll give it a moment. But this right here will give us a nicer view of what's happening in that corona area, how it's impacting, less of that surface view for overall, giving us a better view of the motion at the hotter levels. All right, and in doing so, we can see that the this hotter conditioned area, and pay very close attention to this right here. It's just little tiny flashes. That's what we're seeing. Little tiny flashes. That's little eruptions. These little eruptions. There's another one right there. Little tiny flashes. Now those are not all of these are the CMEs. So the more elaborate ones, the ones that cover a little bigger of an area, are. But then we see right here that event, the M-2.61. And in looking at the event that just occurred, what was that region again, Sydney? It was 3047. Thank you again. All right, right here, and you can see that plasma moving outward as the flare is then initiated by the plasma movement. And you can see the expelling of the plasma. Beautiful display of the arrangement that was on the surface, coiled up. Indeed, Abbott and Costello. But to summarize, looking at Angstrom 171 at full speed, you see many events are occurring this way that will be impacting Earth. And then this right here occurs, and there is a significant CME that is behind Earth's orbit. And I do not see any projection of hitting Earth. At best, it would be glancing, but I don't see that coming towards Earth. But then, in region 3047, there's a movement of plasma that's happening here. You can see it's already having its issues and an eruption. And that eruption causes that C-8.5 solar flare. That CME is going ahead of Earth's orbit and will not impact Earth. So neither of those CMEs appear to be earthbound. although we do have quite a few eruptions that are, and that do appear to be heading towards Earth to cause some slightly active conditions, as I'm familiar with hearing it being called. And yeah, I would expect at least the KP index to be up slightly, nothing too significant. And I would expect that maybe a better aurora, but nothing that would be even remotely close to as if this CME from the region 3053 was projected towards Earth.